So as you enjoy your lunch, and please feel free to begin, I will ask you just take a moment to listen because we will be having a presentation while we enjoy our lunch. I'd like to introduce our next presenter, which is Dr. Frank Thomas. I had the pleasure of meeting Frank for the first time in 2016 when he was launching his program at Christian Theological Seminary in African American Preaching and Sacred Rhetoric. I more recently spent time with Dr. Thomas in early February as we discussed his involvement in this symposium. Dr. Thomas has been described as a scholar, lecturer, author, thinker, teacher, preacher, and master coach. I've personally experienced him to be very open, humble, and generous. His many books include ones on preaching, like How to Preach a Dangerous Sermon. And in his most recent book, The Choice, he describes his personal journey and the process by which he came to make the choice to live his passion from the inside out, achieving alignment in who he is called to be at his core and the work that he is doing. Over 5 years ago, Dr. Thomas came to this conclusion to step out of his role as pastor, one in which he held for over 31 years. So in July 2012, when announcing his retirement to his congregation at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church in Memphis, Tennessee, he shared that he believed his life work going forward was to develop, mentor, encourage, inspire, and do whatever was necessary to cultivate a cadre of scribes and scholars, African American and otherwise, who are committed to transforming the work through sharing the genius of the African American preaching tradition. This is the work that Dr. Thomas currently is doing at CTS, where he offers a model of the practitioner scholar, a model in which he's described scholarship coming out of practice, and the learning is for improving one's gifts for preaching. He simply believes that one should do the work and anything is possible. Dr. Thomas is a leader who embodies this model, and he is deeply committed to his community. He shared with me that when you connect with congregants and communities through the intersection of vision and passion and build a culture of generosity around it, that money will follow the vision, and that you can't beat heart and desire. And that what and how we teach is modeled in the way we engage and practice. So we are very pleased to have Dr. Frank Thomas with us here today. And we felt the need before we move into a presentation on the gift of Black preaching to begin so with a hymn. And so if you've been part of these meetings over the past 3 years, you know that at every one of them we sing Blessed Assurance. So I would like to invite Ernestine Estes to come forward and lead us.
We're going to sit, I assume. Okay. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchase of God, born of his Spirit, washed in his blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Angels descending, bring from above echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I in my Savior am happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with his goodness, lost in his love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
First, let me thank you all for the anointing, whoever had it, to sing my most favorite hymn. So thank you so very much. It is a great honor and a privilege to be with you all, to share with you all, to be in this space for these couple days, and to Amy Kardesh, the Entrust Center for Theological Schools, to Dolores Brisbane, Chris Coble, Brian Williams of the Lilly Endowment, to Frank Yamada, whose iPad I'm using right now, to Amy Larimore, my philanthropic strategist, who brings so much genius to what we do, to the 6 African American theological seminaries whose names I will call simply because we call Duke Divinity School, Vanderbilt, all these. It's just nice to be able to say Hood Theological Seminary, Howard University School of Divinity, the Interdenominational Theological Center, Payne Theological Center, Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology of Virginia Union, and Shaw University Divinity School. It's just good to say those names, to the presidents, to the deans, to the faculty, to the students, and all of us who have been touched by the gift of black preaching, and those who, like me, intend for black preaching to continue to change lives for generations to come. Thank you for enlarging the tent, making the opportunity for those of us doing black theological education in European American seminaries to be a part of this magnificent gathering. I really don't have any words to express my appreciation for just being in the room, let alone being asked to give my Easter speech after John Kinney was the preacher yesterday. I really don't have any words to express just the appreciation and just the word of thanks. I'm excited because though we do work in different settings, we have, many of us, the same mentors, mothers and fathers who shaped us and guided us. Martin Luther King Jr., Gardner Calvin Taylor, Samuel DeWitt Proctor, Vincent Harding, Henry H. Mitchell, Ella P. Mitchell, Prathia Hall, Edward L. Wheeler, Jeremiah A. Wright, and John Kinney, and I really could go on and on. In 1981, which was my last year of seminary many, many moons ago, I had a professor that I loved. His name was John Kinney. Dr. Kinney, as he mentioned yesterday, gave the charge at my service of licensing into ministry at Trinity United Church of Christ, where Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. was my pastor in 1983. Since 1988, Edward L. Wheeler has been a major mentor and influencer in my life. I'll say more about that and him in a minute later in the presentation. I'm just appreciative to be in the room because many of us, we have the same mothers and the same fathers. And when summoned by the collection of elders, both in this room and outside of this room, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. We also have in common this mission from the elders bequeathed to us, the education of black leadership for relevant and transformative ministry to church and society. Now, my practice is I educate any student that walks through the door. I don't discriminate. Race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, denomination, or any other category that is used to divide people. If you enroll, I'm going to give you the absolute best of my teaching ability and experience and knowledge. I am absolutely committed to teaching the genius of black preaching to any and all that are willing to learn about it. Though the black church is not without flaws, I love it deeply because it has sustained and liberated our people during more than 400 years of systemic slavery, racism, hatred, violence, discrimination, lynching, mass incarceration, police violence on unarmed men and women, and so much more. Black religion and black religious institutions have been the most important and vital instruments of black survival and liberation. The African American Church and its salient auxiliaries are the primary institutions that African Americans control and singularly can dictate mission, purpose, values, and work to uplift and benefit the black community. And what is even more, if testimony, as it always is when black folks are lecturing, the God revealed in Jesus Christ that I met in the black church saved my life. This God took a snot-nosed kid off the streets of the south side of Chicago and turned him into more than what he ever dreamed that he would be. The black church and auxiliary institutions have been led by some of the most imaginative and skilled leaders, orators, and preachers. The sheer genius of black preaching gives hope to a community historically and presently under siege. I am privileged to direct the first and the world's only PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. We describe our mission as a journey. Our journey is to teach, develop, and archive the history, the depth, power, beauty, and sheer genius of African American preaching, to ignite a preaching renaissance to revive American Christianity in the 21st century. It's a big vision, but I deeply believe that African American preaching can ignite a preaching renaissance to revive American Christianity in the 21st century. This is the gift of black preaching, and not only to the black community, but to the world, to revive American Christianity, to change it from its tribal American expression that is too often the handmaiden for racism, capitalism, and materialism, as Martin Luther King said, into the universal gospel of Jesus Christ for all people. Most of us have come out of the black church and had our ministries developed, our lives changed and saved from so much death in the black church. I hope you'll permit me a few minutes to tell the relevant parts of my story as to how I got to this place of vision for the PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. God delivers vision to the world through the uniqueness of person and circumstances. When I came out of college, my original intent was to do a PhD program in the history of religion. I applied to my school of choice and was given a conditional acceptance. They said if I would take Greek over the summer, then they would admit me for the fall. I had just graduated from college. I got into school that I went to with a 20 on the ACT, and the average ACT score at the school was 28. I learned that the average ACT score at the school was 28 from a professor who was assigned to me after I took the pre-law school LSAT admission test to see where I was in preparation for taking the test. The professor reviewed the results of my pre-test and said to me that I needed remedial everything, reading, writing, and English, that he couldn't even possibly see that I could do well on the LSAT without remedial reading, remedial English, and remedial writing. And then asked me, how did I get in the school with such a low ACT score in the first place? He then told me that the school average was a score of 28. And then he pulled out a chart and told me that according to my ACT score, on average, I would probably never be better than a C- student. I was in shock. First, I told him that in my neighborhood where I came from, I was considered smart because a whole bunch of my friends had 12s and 16s on the ACT. When I found out I got a 20, I celebrated. Because in my community, I was an intellectual giant. He was not impressed. I did not know it then, but I know it now. My response to him changed my life. I don't know where from, maybe somewhere from the bowels of the black church, something rose up in me, and I said to him, "Sir, your charts do not measure heart and desire. And though I am barely holding on with C's right now, before I get out of this place, I will become an A student." And I walked out of the room. In the last year of my college education, I got an A in every class. In a large class on the history of religions, it was a lecture hall of some 250 students. I set the curve for the class. I was the top student. I basically and almost shut down my social life. I was shy, socially awkward, and nerdy anyway. But to become an A student for the last year of my college career, I lived in the library and I lived in the dorm. I was not going to be a C- student on somebody's chart. I proved something to myself more than I proved to him. I proved to myself that with God, I had the discipline necessary to meet any goal. I was exhausted upon graduation, and when they said Greek over the summer, I did not have the energy. I was simply exhausted. It took God and everything in me to make that professor wrong and prove to myself how right I could be. Right across the street from my PhD school of choice was a seminary. And with guidance from a pastor, I purposed in my heart that I would take classes there for 1 year and then transfer across the street to study for the PhD in the history of religions. It was, after all, it was going to take a minute anyway to convince my wife. I had just got married. I was working full time, went to school, and in spite of the difficulty of juggling schedules, I fell in love with the seminary experience. I never got back to the history of religions and ended up pastoring 2 churches for 31 years of my life. As a pastor, I went through so many experiences, the high and the lows. I was celebrated as the young wonder guru of church growth, growing a small ministry of 35 people to a mega church. Following that, being called to one of the largest churches in America on that side, the high sides. And on the other side, I was sued by 14 church members of the congregation. And it took me 7 years to get up from under that. I preached and pastored under a lawsuit for 7 years, every Sunday. If I mentioned the lawsuit, I'd lose people. They wouldn't come to church. If I didn't mention it, then the people didn't know what was going on. We hadn't figured out how best to communicate that 14 members are suing the church and suing the pastor. I had all of these experiences of pastoring. I can't say I had all of the experience of pastoring, but I had a whole lot of them. But even as I pastored all these years, I had the desire for a side of scholarship in me. What I found was that the practice of ministry raised questions that I needed the academy to help me answer. My most basic question was, I'm a pastor and I want to get better at preaching. So to get better at preaching, I took a second Doctor of Ministry program with Henry H. Mitchell and Edward L. Wheeler as mentors. My Doctor of Ministry project became to define the concept of celebration. Dr. Henry Mitchell handed out a blue line copy of a book called Celebration and Experience in Preaching in 1991 and told the class to critique it. I was the only one in the class crazy enough because a blue line copy is the copy that right before it goes to press. He said, write me a critique. I wrote him a critique. I wrote him a 5-page critique. We get back to class. They say to me, and the night before, you crazy. He don't want a critique. He just wants you to tell her how good the book is, And, they made fun of me. They making all kind of fun. We walk in the next morning. Dr. Mitchell says, okay, let's discuss the book. Let me see your critiques. They say, Frank is our spokesperson, I told Dr. Mitchell that celebration was in the title, but he never defined it. He looked at me and said, you define it. I took up the challenge, and subsequently my Doctor of Ministry work became a book entitled They Like to Never Quit Praising God, The Role of Celebration in Preaching, what many consider to be a homiletical classic, though I quickly mentioned that my royalty checks do not distinguish it as such. In Memphis, Tennessee, in 2003, at the age of 48, I entered a PhD program in rhetoric where I could study black preaching. I enrolled because I wanted to get better at preaching. I kept saying, what in the world is an old person like me doing in a PhD program at 48 with all these young people? I'm too old. I kept telling myself I'm too old, but another side of me kept saying, you're here to get better at preaching. I am what we call in the PhD program a scholar practitioner. I am a pastor who in the practice of ministry found that questions arose that it takes the wisdom, the theory, and the intellectual enterprises of the academy to answer. I do my scholarship for the pastor who is on the front line. I know what it's like to be a pastor. I was on the front line for 31 years. I tell people when I became a professor, I still have smoke in my clothes from being on the front line. I have never lost it and never will. I do my scholarship to help the average pastor who is trying to make possible the freedom and liberation of black people in specific and all people in general. Practitioner scholars engage in scholarship from the perspective of their location in ministry. That practice of ministry suggests issues and possibilities that deserve scholarly and PhD level research and analysis. Research questions can come down from the great halls of theory or up from the common practice and execution of ministry in the everyday lives of people. In the Eurocentric model of education, theory comes down from the great halls, is often privileged, and therefore, at least in some places, the hierarchy of systematic theology and the stepchild of practical theology is in full effect. I dislike the term practical theology because the term has meant this, at least in some places, across the years, and suggests that the practice of ministry is not as important as the world of ideas and the academy. I like the term scholar practitioner when I'm in the academy and the term practitioner scholars when I'm in the church. Fundamentally, I am one who studies theory and academics to make the practice of ministry better and studies the practice of ministry to make academics better. I am fond of saying that all of my intellectuality ultimately serves my spirituality. In my PhD program at the University of Memphis that my brother brought up a little bit ago, my advisor and chair of the department, Michael Charles Leff, had a vision to integrate the rhetoric of black orators and black preachers with the classical and contemporary rhetorical insights, learnings, and the categories, the rhetorical tradition. Leff knew more about the rhetoric of such black orators of Martin King, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Ida Wells, and Malcolm X than anyone I met in my whole life. I have had black radicals. I've been taught by black radicals, but Michael Charles Leff knew more. He had read widely and broadly and did rhetorical criticism and theory from looking at their speeches and their oratory. The day I walked into his office, he had a huge picture of Frederick Douglass on one wall and Martin Luther King on the other wall. I knew that we would get along. Leff believed that there was a tremendous amount that black preachers and orators could teach rhetoric. Though Professor John Campbell, as a Christian rhetorician, recruited us, Leff supported a cadre of black preachers to get their PhD in rhetoric. Including myself, 5 African-American preachers graduated from the University of Memphis out of the rhetoric department, all of us studying some aspect of black preaching. Even now, there's still Leff thought that the inclusion of black preachers could expand to a pipeline. After I graduated, he invited me to co-teach a class with him, The Rhetoric of Martin Luther King, Jr. We taught it at Memphis Theological Seminary and brought over 7 rhetorical students and matched them with 8 theological students. It was a wonderful class. Michael Charles Leff announced to me and the school that he had cancer and died 6 months later. The vision was planted in me that we could do a PhD program in African American preaching on the basis of rhetorical categories, especially because black preaching was inherently rhetorical. I walked across the stage at 53 years old, and 4 years later, at 57 years old, I transitioned out of pastoring to become a full-time professor in homiletics. No program starts in a vacuum, so let me trace the lineage of the PhD program, and I want to turn to just a brief snippet of the history of black theological doctoral education in white institutions. The genesis of the first PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric, located at Christian Theological Seminary of Indianapolis, Indiana, is grounded in the prolific legacy of 2 pioneering programs in theological education for the black church. These programs were founded in the partnership of 2 teacher-mentor giants of the black church and 2 courageous and creative white seminaries, respectively, Henry H. Mitchell and the Martin Luther King Jr. Fellows of the Colgate-Rochester Divinity School, CRDS, of Rochester, New York in 1969, and Samuel DeWitt Proctor and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Fellows of United Theological Seminary, UTS, of Dayton, Ohio, in 1987. In January 1958, Martin Luther King Jr. visited the campus of the Colgate-Rochester Divinity School, and in response, students and faculty became both nationally and locally involved in the civil rights movement. The participation was related to political and economic justice issues and not what would become a tremendously significant justice issue later, the education of black leadership for church and society. In 1967, 14 students organized the Black Student Caucus to form a distinct identity and a unified voice on campus. The BSC asked that an African American professor be hired to teach a course related to black history, and the result was that during the 1967 to 1968 academic year, 2 visiting professors taught 1 day a week. Upon the death of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968, the BSC organized a memorial service for members of the community and the seminary to honor Dr. King. During the service, the BSC demanded the establishment of a program of black church studies, and gifts and commitments were taken to establish an endowed chair. John Cato, as a result, was hired as the full-time African-American faculty person. The BSC established a goal of $800,000 to endow the King Chair. Mahalia Jackson, the Queen of Gospel, helped launch the formal campaign with a gala at a downtown hotel. Well, gala work if you got Mahalia Jackson singing. By September, the BSC had gifts and pledges totaling $260,000. Subsequently, the administration asked to postpone the establishment of the Black Church Studies Program Chair due to a lack of resources. At an all-school luncheon on December 10, 1968, the BSC made specific demands. 11 new trustees on the 36-member board of CRDS. At least three of those members would be members of the executive committee of the board. The next three faculty appointments to be black. The school to take responsibility for completing the MLK Chair Endowment Fund. An immediate plan to hire more secretaries in the school office that were black, and new staff appointments that were black to cover recruitment, field education, and placement of black students. The demands were taken seriously by President Gene E. Bartlett, and special meetings were held to continue the process of change, but change did not occur fast enough. On the first Sunday of March 1969, the doors of the main building were all chained, and just inside the front door, a notice read, "No more school till all our demands are met." The 19 enrolled black students were inside the building. The confrontation lasted for 18 days of anguish, determination, of tension, and uncertainty, both for those locked in and for those locked out. In a talk of a question and answer session at a local church, President Bartlett responded to the question of why school officials did not forcibly remove the students. President Bartlett said this: "Why didn't we move in and take them out of that building? There was, for one thing, a long tradition at Colgate Rochester going back to Howard Thurman and Mordecai Johnson, and distinguished black, at that time, men who had given leadership. In a sense, that whole tradition was in that building. Moreover, the sympathies, the mood, and the hopes of the faculty and white students were also in that building. There was a commitment of the school which had been stated again and again that was in that building. There was a conviction that in our time we too easily run into violence, and there must be a better way to handle this kind of human conflict, and that commitment was in this building. There was moreover respect, men at that time for whom we had great respect. I have to tell you, I doubt if there are any 19 men we could gather who have as much basic commitment and Christian concern as the men who are locked in that building. We did not forcibly remove because all of that was in that building." The lockout was concluded by agreement and a group of prominent African-American educators. The BSC and consultants met at CRDS in May to set some guidelines for the new Black Church Studies program in June 1969. President Bartlett and the BSC made a joint announcement of the appointment of Reverend Henry H. Mitchell to the Martin Luther King Jr. Chair in Black Church Studies, and the fall initiation of the program of Black Church Studies. Financial help had come from two foundations, Eli Lilly and the Irwin Sweeney Miller. I am, as Professor or President Wheeler would tell you, I am the Nettie Sweeney and the Hugh T.H. Miller Professor of Homiletics. These generous benefactors to CTS also funded $180,000 out of Columbus, Indiana, for the King Scholars at Colgate Rochester. In September 1969, an African-American faculty of 5 and 1 adjunct began to teach. On November 10th, 1969, Colgate Rochester Divinity School trustee Gardner Calvin Taylor presided over the inaugural convocation for the Martin Luther King Memorial Professorship of Black Church Studies and the installation of Henry H. Mitchell as the first Martin Luther King professor. Let me tell you quickly the intent of the Black Church Studies program was scholarship and writing based upon a guild of deeply involved practitioners in reflection, research, and writing on the professional practice in Black church culture. The proposal that was funded was to launch a program to produce a bibliography in Black cultural church practice. Henry H. Mitchell describes the purpose. The task of the project was to produce a series of books, monographs, and journal articles on the professional practice of ministry in Black church culture and community. Practice was here understood to signify only that the writing would not deal with theology or biblical studies as such. These were already covered by Black scholars in the field. But the King Fellows were themselves the experts in the bookless field of quote-unquote practical theology. They were to develop a set of recommendations concerning the curriculum needs of Black students for ministry to be submitted in the form of a design. The plan of the program was to accomplish this work in the summers. Initially, they were only to receive a Master's of Theological Studies, but the plan was that a Doctor of Ministry degree could be approved before the targeted commencement date of May 1975. On May 9th, 1975, 19 King Fellows received a Doctor of Ministry degree. Upon graduations, the dissertations were recorded and the real work of publication began. The summer of 1975, the MLK Fellows incorporated in the state of New York and purposely oriented themselves to publish materials for Black seminaries and the Black church. They contracted with Vincent Harding as the editorial evaluator of dissertation manuscripts for commercial publication. Before Harding's work, Judson Press released in 1976 Harold A. Carter's The Prayer Tradition of the Black Church and Church Administration in the Black Perspective by Floyd Massey and now dearly and newly departed Samuel Berry McKinney. These first books, 2 books went into their second printing. Judson also published by H. Beecher Hicks, Images of the Black Preacher, The Man Nobody Knows, Y.T. Walker, Somebody's Calling My Name, Black Sacred Music, and Social Change in 1982. These graduates became luminaries in the work of ministry because of their significance. I want to call their names individually: John Richard Bryant, Y.T. Walker, Harold A. Carter, Elliot Mason, James A. Forbes, Philip R. Cousins, H. Beecher Hicks Jr., Floyd Massey, Williams Augustus Jones, William J. Shaw, Charles S. Hamilton, Carol Felton, Jesse L. Douglas Sr., Joseph D. Clemens, Frederick Boyd Williams, St. Julius A. Simpkins, James J. Robinson, James H. Hargett, George B. Thomas, and Samuel B. McKinney. These were the King Fellows, formed out of Black students demanding in 1969, and funding coming from the Sweeney Miller family out of Columbus, Indiana. Let me talk quickly about United Theological Seminary. Another one of the many legacies of the King Fellows to the Black church and the church in world at large is the UTS of Dayton, Ohio's Doctor of Ministry program for the Black church. Beginning in 1976, seminaries in Ohio came together to form a Doctor of Ministry program. From the consortium, UTS developed its own Doctor of Ministry program in 1985. The vision was continuing education to train leaders in the church to diagnose the ills in the church and community and treat various areas of ministry so that the church can be healthy to lead God's people. The graduates were to be called doctors of the church. At this point, United enrolled predominantly white students in the early 1980s, expressed a desire for greater inclusion. setting the stage for the broader work of the incoming president, Leonard Sweet. The UTS Doctor of Ministry program for Black Church was a collaboration of many, but several key individuals who had all worked at Colgate Rochester Divinity School, namely Leonard Sweet, Darrell Ward, and Mary Olson. Leonard Sweet was the provost at Colgate Rochester Divinity School and came to serve as the president of UTS from 1984 to 1998. Sweet had an inclusive global vision for UTS and desired to prepare African American leaders for church ministry in the 21st century. Sweet sought to open a Doctor of Ministry program to continue the King Fellows tradition of Black church scholarship. To develop such a program, a person was needed that was deeply rooted in the Black church, specifically with the intellect, experience, and passion to make it happen. Sweet invited 29-year-old Darrell Ward, lawyer and Baptist minister, to create a Black church studies program at United, and as such, Ward was hired as Dean of Students and a Dean of Admissions and Dean of the Black Church Ministry Program. Ward convened several alumni and put together a Black church ministry faculty, including Edward L. Wheeler, Charles Booth, Charles Brown, Louis Charles Harvey, Prathia Hall, Gayrod Wilmore, and others. The group began offering Black church study courses to Master Divinity students. Sweet invited Mary Olson from Colgate Rochester to direct the overall UTS Doctor of Ministry program. Again, as they all were from Colgate Rochester Divinity School and had seen the tremendous impact of the King Fellows program, they began with the Colgate Rochester Divinity School motto as a pedagogical paradigm for the program. The uniqueness of the King Fellows was the mentor-based aspect of the program, where Henry Mitchell served as a primary mentor and led the group and classes. Ward and Olson adopted wholeheartedly this mentor-based model of instruction. Ward began to search for a mentor to lead the first cohort and ultimately the program. Ward said, "One night between being awoke and asleep, I received the name of Samuel DeWitt Proctor." Proctor had academic, theological, pastoral credentials, and global leadership experience. Proctor was approached about leadership and mentoring the African American students at the UTS Doctor of Ministry program in Black Church Studies. In 1987, Proctor was hired to the UTS faculty to mentor the Doctor of Ministry program and teaching ethics in the Master of Divinity program. Proctor, Ward, and Olson formed the first group of the Doctor of Ministry program for Black Church. The first group, the Samuel DeWitt Proctors. The second group was the Mitchell Wheeler Fellows, of which I was privileged to be a part. I could list some of the well-known preachers of that very first group: Otis Moss, Jeremiah Wright. I could go all kinds of, but mothers and fathers that we know. We were the second group. We were the junior group. Carolyn Knight, Alvin Jackson, E.K. Bailey, myself, Cynthia Hale, we were the junior group to that group. Well, despite many challenges, the thing grew phenomenally, I'm sure. We may even have some graduates in this room. In 2004, Proctor went home to be with the Lord. Leonard Sweet declared that Proctor was the genius of the program. Upon Proctor's death, so many tributes poured in all over the country. This was said: the partnership that Proctor forged with Leonard Sweet, Darrell Ward, and Mary Olson produced what must be considered the most significant D-Min program in the West. The tenacity of this program, his academic integrity, and the judiciousness of his ideas as to how we should proceed in this human encounter in the arena of advanced theological education and preparation in the epicenter of where we must strive to go. Sam Proctor was a legend in his own time. Of course, I don't need to say much more about that. If you knew him, I wish I knew him. He came to preach for me at one of the churches that I pastored, and just was meant so much. Anyway, the death of Proctor marked a new era in the program. As you know, it's still going. Mary Olson, in reflection, mused that the program at United was a new movement, learning a spiritual and intellectual transforming movement like the civil rights movement. It also was a movement of God. It was the integration of the social sciences and theology under the direction of a mentor in the cohort group process that helped so many to learn and face the challenges of ministry in the 21st century. Let me now quickly turn with this as the lineage that comes down to this PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. The PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric at Christian Theological Seminary is based in and continues the training of black church leaders begun with the King Fellows and the Proctor Fellows. Frank A. Thomas, director and visionary for the program, was a graduate from the second, I told you, a cohort at UTS. When Matthew Meyer Bolton, president of CTS, approached me and asked me what would it take to bring me to teach at CTS, I shared with him that I would go to the school that would allow me to develop a PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. He asked me to explain the vision. I explained the vision to him. He told me to give him 30 days and he'd get back to me. I finished the conversation, never thought any more about it. Within 30 days, he called me and invited me to come down on campus and said this to me: I cannot promise you that we will do the program. What I can promise you is that I will support it 100%. That began serious and earnest discussions between me and CTS. With an inclusive vision of creative ministry for the black church, CTS President Bolton and distinguished Professor Ronald J. Allen helped to conceptually develop the PhD program and unanimously shepherded through the faculty and the trustee board. Ron Allen had been there close to 34 years. Ron Allen bought it instantly and carried the faculty. He was the senior faculty. When he said, we respected him. Even now, he's a senior faculty person. When he speaks, we listen. The president carried the board of trustees. This is what I said: I will not do a program if it's a 4-3 vote. It's too much work and it's too much energy. If it's 4-3 and I win by politics, I will not do it. If we can't have a near unanimous vote out of the trustees and the faculty, Mike Miller was there, I will not. I just can't do it. It's too much work. I can't do 4-3. It's too much work. If we can't see the vision of this, then I have to do something else. Well, the faculty and trustee board voted it unanimously. While CTS support was developing, I began to build national support. I convened a group of African American homileticians. 25 African American homileticians came for a consultation to Indianapolis, Indiana, to discuss the state of black preaching. I convened it, and on the second day of the meeting, I floated to them the idea of a PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. The response was emphatic and compelling. The notion that African American preaching, once considered by some as buffoonery, ignorance, emotionalism, and entertainment, could rise to the level of an academic discipline with a terminal PhD degree was a source of pride and excitement for everybody in the room. Then I convened a cross-denomination group of prominent practitioner pastors I had met across the 31 years of being a pastor. That was the next year. I held another consultation. And then we talked about the state of black preaching. And then on the second day, I presented to them the idea of the very first PhD program in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric, to which they were excited and said to imagine that what was considered buffoonery, ignorance, emotionalism is rising to the level of a terminal degree. I had support out of national pastors. I had support out of national African American homileticians. Subsequently, both the Association of Theological Schools, ATS, and the Higher Learning Commission accredited the program, with the result of the first cohort matriculating in January 2017 with 11 students. One of the blessings of God was that when the trustees voted the program, the president placed in the budget the need to raise for the PhD program to raise $100,000 in the first year. So, I think the 21st century faculty people have to raise money, because I found, I saw it, but it didn't mean, I was so busy trying to, we're gonna vote this, I'm getting excited. I didn't read the fine print. It said $100,000 you gotta raise, right? Always read the fine print. I was partnered with Amy Larimore, who's in this room. She was then the director of seminary advancement to raise those funds. The reality was that we had planned a program, but Amy asked strategic questions like, assuming we get accredited, then what will we do to raise the resources for the program? The silence that she got back indicated a need for a fundraising plan, including endowment, debating the question of sustainability, and also no life-altering debt. It wasn't on anybody's radar. Amy had looked carefully across the country and had seen the data about debt and sustainability. She also had worked for Lake Institute and had seen the Lake program and directorship become endowed and how they withstood transition because of a better model than many. Amy and I pioneered the value and the commitment that any student that gets admitted to that PhD program will not have life-altering debt. We ain't saying you ain't gonna have debt. If you wanna live in a penthouse and run up a bunch of debt, that's up to you. But life-altering debt. See, we didn't have big money. We weren't not a big school. I can't compete with Vanderbilt and all that stuff. But what I can say to a student is we're committed that you won't have life-altering debt. This meant we'd have to go out and raise some money so that students wouldn't have life-altering debt. In one of our deliberations, we took trips together, raised money together. She said, why don't we endow the program and endow the directorship of the program so that the program runs into perpetuity? I mean, it would only take about $9 or $10 million to endow the program and the directorship. Let's do it. That was easy. It makes sense to me. She explained the importance of endowment and the importance of into perpetuity. And not only the program, but the directorship. So we'd always have the possibility of selecting the best directors because money wasn't going to be an issue. We began to work together. Not only did we raise $100,000, we raised $600,000 in our first year, and even saw our first $100,000 endowment gift come in the door with a matching gift potential to $400,000. Even though I was a pastor for 31 years of my life, I thought I knew how to raise money, but this woman and her knowledge base taught me so much more about raising money than I ever thought. It was her knowledge base and training coupled with some of my relationships that allowed us to reach these heights. Some of these pastors were involved in the initial visioning for the program. They became inaugural donors. It was amazing, but 99% of that money came from the black church. 99% of that money came out of the black church. New donors to CTS. Didn't even know who CTS was. Never heard of CTS. You ever said, I'm teaching CTS. Where's that? It's in Cuba somewhere. No, I'm just joking. It's in Indianapolis. We funded 8 tuition scholarships and so much more from the black church. I petitioned the president such that Amy Larimore could become the philanthropic strategist for the PhD program. Now, I'm sure that you're asking, what does a philanthropic strategist do? First, she added strategic thinking to the program and encouraged me to develop a strategic plan. I gave it right back to her. Since she had training in developing strategic plan, lead us then. And, I'm put it together. I'm fine. She put it together, and we're in the process now of submitting to our dean, to our president, a strategic plan for the PhD program. The strategic plan discussed $10 million to endow the program and directorship. It discussed my transition and succession since I am 62 years old. We went down the list and confronted the strategic issues. She told me that we need to do marketing and branding, or we would be the best kept secret in theological education. And we developed the branding and the marketing system of the PhD program so that students and potential donors would know who we were. And CTS allowed us to develop our own logo. That was a big discussion. Our own logo we developed consistent with the logo of CTS. Without her, the program would be an academic moment. and not a force and a movement. We are a movement. By 2025, we intend to graduate 25 PhDs in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric, with far more to come into perpetuity long after I am dead and gone. Our mission is to ignite a preaching renaissance to revive American Christianity in the 21st century. Let me close with several comments. Let me first let you know that my organist plane is going to be late. You know, usually my organist kind of picks me up right now. So my organist plane is late, so I'm kind of by myself. You know, let's see how this goes. But I want these several reflections that if there's time, we might discuss. First, culturally competent white leaders and institutions, theological and philanthropic, can be significant helpers in the mission of the education of black leadership for relevant and transformative ministry to church and society. The PhD program in African American preaching would have never gotten off the ground without some measure of cultural competence in Matthew Bolton and Ronald J. Allen. Following Ruby Sales, I do not believe there's anything wrong with being European American. It is whether or not one adopts the white supremacy that is often attached to being European American in this nation. Some European Americans do not adopt it or work to free themselves from its oppressive mantle. I will work with anybody as long as we're not dealing with white supremacy amongst us. Second, was I clear on that? Let me keep connecting. There are culturally competent people that will support you and work with you and help you. We just can't have the white supremacy games being played. Second, one of the advances to the mission of the education of black leadership for relevant transformative ministry to church and society is the attraction of mentors that are strong national persons with both stellar academic and strong pastoral backgrounds. If you look at the program, Colgate Rochester, they found Henry H. Mitchell, who had a strong national presence, had some pastoral experience, and UTS found Samuel DeWitt Proctor. Mentors who have credibility in the church and the academy that can relate to faculty, administration, students, and alumni and pastors of congregation. We need somebody who can relate to all these constituencies. I call them scholar practitioner or practitioner scholars. Try to make that a little clearer so y'all can help me clear it up. Let me get to number 3 because I'm heading to my seat. I believe that the way education in general and theological education in specific moves forward is new knowledge made possible by thought leadership and innovation. We have the classical theological disciplines, and I don't intend to throw any of them out. I just think thought leadership and innovation is needed now. And one innovation that I like or would like to see is to create the environment where professors and staff are allowed to follow their passion and take that passion to the next level within the context of the vision. I had a passion for teaching black preaching, and when allowed and encouraged, I took it to the next level and a PhD program emerged. Maybe it dawns on me and occurs to us that the only prize is not to get a chair at a tier 1 level institution. Maybe there is something beyond being a distinguished professor of that which already is, but to be the director of the first PhD program in black theology or womanist studies, something that is not yet. I sat down with a gifted young womanist scholar, had lunch, and suggested that though she had the ability to be a distinguished professor of the already, what about thought leadership and knowledge production of the not yet? There are so many programs waiting to be done. I mentioned I'm waiting for the first PhD program in womanist theology. I was glad to hear that Yolanda Pierce and Howard University is working on PhD in Africana studies. I was listening to Dr. John Kinney. What would it be like if Dr. John Kinney had 12 PhD students that he could pour into? And, we were talking at the table. We said, well, what about the money? I said, well, you mean that as for all the years I've known Dr. Kinney, wherever he's gone, churches or settings like this, people respond to him. You mean we couldn't find money out of all of those people for Virginia Union to deliver a PhD program in black theology, and he'd get, before he retired, before he sets to the sunset, so far gone, he'd have 12 PhD students to mentor. We couldn't get that done? We can't find a scholar, a womanist scholar, who would be so tremendously excited and pour herself into a PhD program in womanist studies? We couldn't find that? There's so much waiting to be done. There are so many new knowledge frontiers. That means you don't dismiss what the classical, I'm not saying unmoored from the classical theological, fields, but certainly we can. Let me get number 4. Y'all with me on number 3? Yeah. It was mighty quiet in here on that one. Ooh. Number 4, to move past the series of academic moments to a movement. I experienced this as a pastor. We were masterful at making moments, but making a movement is a different thing. To create a movement requires strategic and philanthropic assets and planning. It must be made available to programs, specifically a commitment to fundraising and endowing strategic planning, succession planning, brand and marketing resources. I was glad to hear this morning the testimonies of what these funds from the Lilly Endowment and the work within Trust and our sisters, Dolores Brisbourne and Amy and the team that they have. Because we go from moment to moment to moment. What we need is a movement. And you get to a movement by strategic thinking, philanthropic assets, succession planning. We learned this the hard way. How in the world? It hit me. We were out raising money. We were working on, made a trip up to somebody who we thought would make a major endowment gift. And it dawns on me, and I already dawned on Amy, it just dawned on me, how in the world can you ask somebody for an endowment gift and don't have an answer when they ask you, what's the strategic plan? Does that make sense to anybody but me? I mean, how can we ask somebody to make an endowment gift, really any gift, if we don't have a strategic plan in place to tell them what we're going to do and what the benefit? We found that the question gets asked when we talk about endowment to donors, how do we know that the school's going to be around? What is the financial and strategic viability, not only of the program, but the school itself? This is at least some of the reason that big gifts go to known quantities to overcome this fear. I don't say it's right. I just say it is what it is. People feel safer giving money to Vanderbilt, Princeton, Emory. They have some sense that the school's going to be around. Finally, I do not buy the lament, we don't have money. Money follows vision. CTS did not give us a whole lot of money. They gave us a whole lot of money. We wouldn't have had to get on our horse and ride around, fly around and ask people. If you have a compelling vision and you prayerfully and skillfully share it, money will follow. I repeat, CTS did not give us a whole lot of money. A new program, and we had to raise $100,000 in the first year. Is that giving you a lot of money? We didn't wait on the foundation to give us what we needed. We got out and knocked on doors. We beat the pavement. Many of the people we talked to had never heard of CTS. It would have probably been easier if we had been Princeton or Harvard, these names behind us. All we had was prayer, heart, and desire. You will not outwork us. You just won't do it. You may have more resources, you have a bigger name, but you will not outwork us. I just wonder if you all permit me, that's what Dr. Kenny said, I'm getting ready to say something especially difficult. So I love y'all when I say this. If we're doing philanthropy, we're doing black theology with a white model of philanthropy. Not deeply enough, I could be wrong, believing in the beauty and the power of black philanthropy. An overemphasis and dependence on foundations for grants or big celebrities like LeBron and Oprah. We could just get Oprah to give us money. We underestimate the power of black philanthropy, the smaller gifts, the power. The black church can fund everything we need. I haven't heard it talked about much. Just kind of y'all said, somebody said, I think it was Lattimore, somebody said they had somebody had the 10th largest construction company. I assume I was a black person that they were willing to fund whatever. Pain, thank you. But what the power, I'm a nobody. I'm a mid-level faculty person, but we need a conference on the power of black philanthropy. The celebration of black philanthropy. Or as Yolanda Pearson, I was talking to her last night, she told me that we all had the experience of the mother of the church who, when heard that you were going to school, slipped you by the side and gave you balled up money and put it in your hand. That was black philanthropy. How much can be done on nickels and dimes and quarters while we wait for LeBron, as much as LeBron is doing? Let me suggest, since I'm on all this trouble, let me get this out. Many institutions are not structured to innovate. The forces of mediocrity and inertia are all around. And we can easily fall into the trap of what we don't have in comparison to other groups and other schools. I think we have an overdependency on foundations and grants. I have nothing. If I would love to have, I'm fine. I just want us to own. I want to come to the table as a full partner. I have the support of the black church, and the black church has given us this. If you can help us, we love to be in partnership with you, but we come from a position of ownership rather than a position of our hands out because we can't raise the money. It's a difference. I don't want to come with money to get to be sustainable. I want to be sustainable before we ask you for the money. That make a difference? Which brings me to our text. Did y'all know we had a text? We are not barren. Before I share my text with you, let me suggest that I am sensitive to how texts are used to disembody the bodies of women, and especially black women. I am sensitive to the imagery that I'm about to use of the text of the barren woman. And we do not know who or what woman or a loved one or who or what women in this room might be here right now struggling with barrenness. So as I use the image of barrenness, I realize what I'm doing, and I'm loving you and supporting you. I come from a talk with a great mega church pastor friend who said to me, we have spent thousands and thousands of dollars in fertilization, all kind of things, and none of it has worked. This is what he said to me. He said, I'd give up every ounce of the fame, the money, and this entire mega church, everything, if it would help my little girl have a baby. So when I raise barrenness, I am sensitive to the young lady I was mentoring. She called me, completely broke down. She and her husband had spent everything. The doctors trying to get fertile, the doctor asked one more time. She said, I just can't do it. I can't just. I said, well, pray, just pray. I'll pray with you. We pray. Your husband pray. We'll see what happens. She called me and told me several months later that God had made it happen. That's the word that's in me when I read this text. You see, you all selected for me Isaiah 54:2. You heard that text? Enlarge your tent. But if you go back further, it's verse 1. It is a word to the 6 black theological schools and all of us in the theological enterprise who in this time are barren in one way or another. The text says, "Sing, O barren one who did not bear. Burst into song and shout, you who have not been in labor. For the children of the desolate woman will be more than the children of her that is married, says the Lord. Enlarge the site of your tent. Let the curtains of your habitation be stretched out. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes in the ground, for you will spread out to the right and to the left. Sing, O barren one." That's the sound of joy. Lift up your voices in exaltation and praise. The barren here denotes the black church confined within the narrow limits of Eurocentric fundraising model in respect to the very small amount of finances in comparison. Sometimes it can feel like being deserted of God. They got all this and we gonna get this. The desertion, this desertion is represented under the imagery of a female who is not able to bear a child and now has a chance to rejoice. The children of the barren woman will be more than the children of the married wife. With God, we have more than enough in our community. With God, we have more than enough in our resources. With God, we can be owners. We don't have to be borrowers and lenders. With God, we don't have to have our hand out. With God, we can get a compelling vision and find and use our gifts and our talents and our resources. We can learn from one another. Some of us got the vision, some of us can see it, and some of us got the strategic and planning and philanthropic skills to make it come alive. We can learn from each other. We can talk with each other, and we can work together. And we can accept help from a position of ownership. Pennies and nickels and dimes and quarters build a lot of stuff. Some of the schools in this room was built from pennies and nickels and dimes and quarters. Enlarge the site of your tent, and let the curtains of your habitations be stretched out. Don't hold back. Lengthen your cords. Strengthen your stakes in the ground, for you will spread out to the right and to the left. In Jesus' name, amen.
We have time for some question and answer, and I invite anyone who would like to reflect on Dr. Thomas's 5 points to please do so, and we can bring you a microphone.
I just want Dr. Thomas to mention an item that we reflected on related to Hood Seminary and one of our faculty members, Caucasian.
Yes, go ahead.
He's a scholar who is. I just want Dr. Thomas to reflect on a matter that he and I chatted about for a minute the other day regarding one of our faculty members and
Yes.
collaboration with your program.
Andre Resner, who is a homiletician who has done a tremendous amount of very powerful work in the joining of rhetoric and preaching. So when I was trying to design the program, since I'm trying to design a program in rhetoric and preaching, and I love his book, Person and Message, I called him and ran it by him. This is what I'm thinking, what are you thinking? And then we had breakfast at the Academy of Homiletics, another. Then I said, I need affiliate faculty. Would you come and teach? And he said, I got to run it by my president. I said, well, if he give you a no, call me. I'll go up there, right? President Lattimore said, yes, he's going to be teaching a class coming up. He's white, which is back to my Presbyterian. I don't have a problem. I tell you, it's nothing wrong with being European American to me. It's just I can't deal with the white supremacy. We can relate as equals or working to be equals, as, some positive relationship. I can work with anybody. Any other questions and comments? I know that lecture was a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for your presentation. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about this notion of black philanthropy, especially rooted in the black religious tradition, where we kind of diminish passing the hat and more informal ways of raising funds through fellowship, through communal engagements. So I wonder if you could just help us think a little bit more about black philanthropy, but how it also can tie into some of the proven strategies that we know as well in terms of using research and data to thicken that process. So how do you combine the two, the best of both? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great question. Amy introduced me to a book by Valeta Fullwood. It's called Giving Back. And she chronicles the legacy of giving circles in the African American community. As a matter of fact, the book is a result of a giving circle, where a group of people came together, pooled their monies. She wrote the book. One of the photographers for the book was in the group. They produced the group, and all the profits from the book come to the group, and the group disperses in grants. So what if giving circles decided to support Payne Theological, the PhD program, where a group came together and began to work together in a giving circle to support a program or a school? I think that's what I'm meaning by, and I hope I'm not punitive. I just think we have an over-dependency on foundations and over-dependency on Oprah and LeBron and waiting for some big donor somewhere, when there are myriad of giving circles. What if a church adopted a giving circle, and the pastor allowed the student to come preach once a year while they're in their program? The ownership is a partnership between the school, the student, and the church. So I think that and then that doesn't even count the levels of increased wealth by African Americans since, in this latter post-civil rights era. But I think you have to have a compelling vision. And I think that you have to have a reasonable amount of assurance that these funds are going to be used for what they say it's going to be used for. Because once a donor smells, so I learned what a donor commitment letter looks like. I learned that a donor commitment letter binds the school. It protects the donor. And if the school does anything other than that money than what that donor commitment letter says, there are problems. And I think John Kennedy said that even if they don't understand your vision, they will respect the investment of your integrity. He said something like that yesterday. I put it on Twitter, but I think that I've learned to ask. I think asking is spiritual. See, what we do is we practice values alignment, which means if the values align, then the gift or whatever is going to come. You have to worry about that. So some people, I'll sit down and talk to them about the PhD program, African American preaching, and their eyes light up. I went to talk with Frida Sampson, the daughter of Dr. Frederick G. Sampson II in Detroit. And I told her about the PhD program. And I said to her, what if we could work on a scholarship in your father's name? And we talked it through, values alignment. And once there's values alignment, once the value align, this is what I've learned, that is this coming across? Are we still being streamed? Are we being streamed? We are. Okay, I'll try the best way to say this. Amy said to me, asking for money on the first visit is like asking for sex on the first date. Y'all, you get that when you go home. That this is a relationship. And when the values align, so how do we get values alignment? Sometimes it takes a year to get value alignment. Sometimes it's a tremendous amount of work. My testimony, all the development people just shout right now. This is an amazing amount of work. It is so much amount of work. We think about, and Amy won't let me do it. I want to get a bell. She's doing talk about, and when we get a check, I ring that bell down the quarters of the school, and we all celebrate. Because you know how much work it is? It's a heck of amount of work to get through values alignment, to get to a person saying, I'll do the gift, then getting them to sign the gift agreement and getting a check. So I had to get on a plane, make a 3-city tour across the weekend to get 3 checks. Because I had to get on the plane. I'll be there on Saturday, and I'll be there on Friday, I'll be there on Saturday, I'll be there on Sunday. I took my whole weekend. Because the only way that I was going to get the check was if I actually showed up. They had been promising, yeah, Doc, I'll send it to you. Yeah, da-da-da. No, okay, I'm coming to you. I'll be in your city on Friday. Are you going to be there? I'll be in your city on Saturday. This is a lot of work. And I don't subscribe that a 21st century faculty person cannot be involved in philanthropy. You can't say that's their job over there. As hard as money is now, the school will close on y'all. Yes.
I have a question, Dr. Thomas.
Help me.
Thank you, first of all, for coming.
Well, thank you for
And
having me.
thank you for awakening us in Black philanthropic efforts. But if you had 3 things to enlarge the tent of Black theological education, what would they be?
Number one, I would create an environment where these scholars and a staff could follow their passion and envision new things. A professor that is not teaching out of their passion, or what John Kennedy said yesterday, with hair on fire. I love black preaching. I don't have a problem. When I get into class and I teach black preaching, I'm excited. I love to read about it. I love to do it. I love to write. I want faculty to have that kind of passion, because if you create an environment and you support them within the context of the vision, they will come up with new things. Secondly, I would say to the faculty person, we would allow you to dream and vision, but you must be active in fundraising. You cannot adopt the old model that it's the development department to do the fundraising. And the third, I think I work with everybody and anybody who is willing. I work with anybody who has a passion to share black preaching. White, green, yellow, pink, red. I just don't want to do the white supremacy. I don't want to play the hierarchical games. Like, for example, as a requirement to graduate in the PhD program, you have to teach 2 classes to non-seminary trained persons. We're not going to play this game that we got PhDs and you got to pay $2,500 to come over here and get a class from us. We're not going to play that game. We teach everybody. I got this from a white preacher, Fred Craddock, who when he retired, he went to the mountains of Appalachia and taught preaching. From Emory, Candler School of Theology, to the mountains. So we're not going to play this hierarchy game as if MDivs and master degrees, or as Dr. Kenny and Dr. Wheeler said yesterday, you've got these people who have built ministries. And because they don't have an MDiv, and they know more about it, and they would be helped. School would be helped. So I just don't like to, I was blessed to get the education that I have. I don't like to play the games. I don't play the Vanderbilt versus CTS. You know, Vanderbilt is this. I don't play the game. I was blessed to get whatever little degree there that I got. I was a snot-nosed kid on the south side of Chicago. So I work with, if you tell me you want to improve your preaching, I'm going to work with you.
Thank you.
Y'all looking at me like either it's late. Yes, come on. Amy.
Dr. Thomas, would you say a little bit more about how structures or traditional structures can limit innovation?
Yeah.
I think this is a common reality.
I think that if we were honest, and there's probably, my dean is probably watching this. Hi, Dr. Leah Gunning Francis, my president, hey, Bill Kincaid. We press on the CTS system. The classic example, when we came up that we needed a logo, then why do y'all need a logo? School's already got a logo. Well, except we're a black PhD program, and the donors don't know the CTS logo, and we would be helped to reach these communities, so we need a logo. So we had discussion back and forth, and finally we agreed we could have a logo. But it was discussion back and forth. So now you have a program. So think that you have a program that has its own logo. And that may be, in some schools that may not be a problem. For us, we had never experienced that. Now you got a program with its own strategic plan. Why does a program need a philanthropic strategist? We have a development department. Why does a program need a philanthropic? So we press on a regular basis on the organization. Succession planning. Endowment. So, okay, so you all are going to raise money for the PhD program, but you're not going to raise money for the school. Well, the endowment money goes to the school. The PhD program don't keep the money. But we press on the systems on a regular basis. And so it takes the school, they've been very gracious. We go in rooms and we talk, and we go back and forth and talk, and it takes time and talk and but for the most part, we haven't wanted for much because we go out and raise money. So those are some of the kinds of issues. So are we going to create a siloed? So some of the fear is that, okay, you all are going to create a siloed thing over here, and then y'all going to become y'all's own entity, and then you're going to separate from the school. I said, well, first of all, you don't know me very well. I said, first of all, I've been married 40 years, so I tend to do long-term relationships. I was 18 years in a pastorate and 13 years in a pastorate for 32 pastors and 31 years. I tend to do long-term relationships. I came here to invest. I didn't come here to get and sneak out in the dark. I didn't come here to make a name for myself. God's already done that. All right? God's done more than I'm not trying to use, I'm trying to get the work done. This is the work. Matter of fact, the one piece that I left out is the question of legacy. This is my legacy. And so some of the ways that we talk to donors about, or many, many African-American preachers that I talk to, I think I'm going to share this with y'all. Many African-American preachers that we talk to have not thought through the question of legacy. So we did a one-day conference. Amy and I put it together, and we invited preachers just to talk about legacy. And how I got to the PhD program, I didn't tell this part, I was trying to cut the time as best I could, is that we have so much of the genius of African American preachers going to the grave. So we have Caesar Clark, one of the premier preachers in the African American community. I'll take C.L. Franklin. C.L. Franklin, daughter of Aretha Franklin. We don't have one African American book written on C.L. Franklin. I don't mind majority books on C.L. Franklin, but we are in the tradition, right? So can I get a scholarship from a church to fund a student that would do a dissertation on C.L. Franklin as part of the legacy? Or what about can I call it? Amy, can I call a name? And like, you think I should call like? Thank you. I'll use that. Right. So AME, right? AME Zion. So why couldn't I get the AME Zions to provide a scholarship for a dissertation to perpetuate the legacy? I got a student that has a need for a scholarship. I've got a family that's got the material that don't know what to do with it. Why can't we hook all that up? And I go to the AME bishops and say, hey, y'all, can we get a scholarship? I got a young student over here who'll do the work. That has to do with legacy. Yes?
Well, thank you for the lecture. And what you were just stating, it opens up. The point you were just making opens up an opportunity for us to begin to think broader about the intellectual genealogy that was mapped out. Because in many ways, what we also think, the gift of Black theological education is that it is a gift that doesn't just occur in isolation. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking of the genealogy of the programs at Colgate Rochester and then at the Proctor Fellows. Two programs set apart and your current program in African American preaching, and even the desire to create more intellectual resources. What if we were to think about Black theological education in conversation with other intellectual trends within, let's say, within Black studies? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, when we think of the early 1970s, we'll see a dissertation that erupts out of Brandeis by Hortense Spillers on the Black sermon. Mm-hmm. But she writes that dissertation out of English. Mm-hmm. We also have a number of programs that are erupting in Black studies that are not only erupting on white college campuses, but they're also erupting on Black college campuses. Mm-hmm. We now open up an opportunity for us to begin to think about not just disciplinary orientations, which PhDs direct us toward, but actually now let's think of the Black university movement that erupts out of Howard. So in a sense, the vision that erupts in the vision of Blackness that erupts is a vision that can't even be contained within the edifices of what we think of the college or the university. And even the Black church then becomes the site for all of these new movements. So I think of, you think of People's College in Nashville or Malcolm X Liberation University in North Carolina. So in a sense now, if we begin to expand the terrain, we can begin to even think broadly about that intellectual genealogy that then gives life to Black preaching. Right. Because Black preaching is not just, it's not disciplinarily contained. Right. So how do we move and decolonize the disciplines so that then we don't get contained within them? We don't want to wrap ourselves within another prison house. Right. And all of a sudden, we may think we're free, right, but we're actually found ourselves within the same home. And in the sense of collaboration, community, and creativity that erupted out of the Black freedom movement, how do we then catalyze that for a new movement that is the PhD program in Black preaching?
Right. So thank you for that, because I think that's what I try. I match rhetoric, because usually the PhD in preaching comes from theology. I matched rhetoric, which opened up a whole. I could study the preaching of Malcolm X, the preaching of Jay-Z. I mean, sacred rhetoric opens up a whole. I agree with you. This opens up a whole. And I think that if we have a student enrollment problem, we haven't created the programs that the students want to attend. It's not that they don't want to come. We haven't adapted yet or reimagined enough yet where it's relevant. You know, Jay-Z says the truth is always relevant. So I'm looking for innovation in theological education. I'm not saying throw the classical disciplines out, because that's part of the tradition that we get also. But I think a whole lot more creative thinking. You know, so take for example, you cannot tell me if somebody developed a PhD in womanist theology that women wouldn't come in droves to that program. You can tell me that. I don't have the energy, it's not mine to do. You can't tell me that if, why don't we have a master's in Christian philanthropy? Why do we have to go over to the University of Indiana? Chris, I'm gonna get the name wrong. What is and what's the other side of it? The Lilly School of Philanthropy. Why aren't we teaching philanthropy in seminary? When we know that anybody that's doing ministry in the 21st century is going to have to be raising money. So that's why I think that if you create the environment where staff and professors can innovate within the context of the vision, I'm not saying unmoored innovation, in the context of the vision, I think we come up with some amazingly relevant stuff. Yes?
I want to just ask another follow-up question about the philanthropic tradition of the Black church. And you contrasted the grandmothers with Oprah.
Yes.
But it strikes me that really those are just extremes, right? What we're really talking about is whether you focus on $100 donors, $1,000 donors, $10,000 donors, or higher.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me, in my more limited knowledge of fundraising, that the conventional wisdom is to focus on the higher level donors. You may not get Oprah, but you can focus on business owners and lawyers and people who can give $10,000, and not to focus on the grandmothers, because you could spend all of your time every day talking to grandmothers who will give you, $10 a month, or you could spend time talking to lawyers who might give you $5,000 a year. So I'm just wondering if you can reflect on that, because it's not that we should dishonor the smaller donors, but we don't have unlimited resources to reach out to every well-meaning but resource-limited donor.
Now, we have people who do this professionally who are much more able and better to speak to this than I am. But I'll simply say that I've learned that every donor is valuable, and though I do tend to slant toward a bigger gift if I don't watch myself, I've learned to have a point at which, even for a bigger donor, it's beyond the time. To me, that comes out of being scared to ask. And so as I have built my capacity and my competency to ask, I have a sense now. So I know I'm not responding to your question because we grapple with it, because you're right. We can't afford to give all of the time. But then on the other hand, if somebody's got to look in the eye and it's values alignment, I want to spend time with them. But but I can't. So I just live in attention unless some professional in here, Amy, you got some suggestions you want to make to that comment. You probably respond to it better than I would, but this is my philanthropic strategist that gets me out of trouble.
I'm just going to go to the conversation that was held in our breakout group as a safe space. They talked about the strength of the six, about what could happen collaboratively that could not happen independently, in thinking about a national campaign around historically black theological education. And everybody in the room started having eyes dance about what is the possibility that people recognize these six as something not canvassing from one another, but celebrating this special gift together. And everybody started talking about what would that mean for us if we had an infrastructure that would allow us to do this, where you could designate your gift, but you could say theological education matters, and I now know about it because nobody independently could do it well. I think the challenge in not understanding black philanthropy is we see ourselves as beneficiaries and not benefactors. And so whether it's the grandmother or the multimillionaire who could leave a big gift, because we don't often treat everybody as a benefactor, that when we say philanthropy, people don't even see it in themselves. They think it's somebody else around the corner, down the street. And when we talk about the gift of this theological, black preaching saved my life, then people we thought could give $3,000 make a $45,000 commitment, because we underestimate what the capacity is. And that structure is, how do we breed systems that honor both the grandmother, who, by the way, the more consistent giver is the bequest giver, not the big giver. And so we can go for the big giver, and I celebrate their gifts. But if we miss the consistent giver, then we will never address why only 5% of people leave their bequest to the church. Because we do not have the conversation. If we do not talk about what you care about in life, we cannot expect a gift in death.
So I get that on a regular basis.
Well, I do think that conversation is going on.
Go ahead.
One of the schools, John Kinney, thank you, dear. John Kinney said, you have all these churches, I won't name the state, why don't you ask each of them to commit to you $100? I forget what he said. Is that right? He said $100, and in the aggregate, what would that do? Because he was talking to, he accuses me of making him do too much work. Well, that was one of those cases where we were trying to revitalize a community. I know who it was. I don't want to call him. So, but he talked about those small gifts in the aggregate becoming a big gift. So I think you have to know the black culture, because, I don't know, I was laughing with somebody the other day about, I don't want to fry any more chicken and cook any collard greens. But that's how I got through Tuskegee. Okay? So those little gifts, when I got ready to go to college, my Sunday school teacher gave me a wad of $1 bills.
Black philanthropy.
Because I'd been in the church. And every week until I graduated, I got $5. Of course, I'm old as dirt, so $5 then felt like $500. So you have to honor that small gift as much as the big one, because it's Jesus and the lady putting the one whatever thing that she had, that little gift. All right, what did he say? All right, so I don't think we can move away from that in this black culture, because we know that. And John Kinney really gave a challenge to this school, that that's the way you can not only talk about who you are, but pull them in. I think they accepted it, right? Okay, so I think that they both are important, especially in this community.
It strikes me that to combine this and this, because I find this very energizing. I find this conversation really energizing. But the idea that to think of people more as benefactors rather than as beneficiaries, and it makes me think of my conversation last year or 2 years ago with Wes Brown from Duke, who addressed this group a couple years ago. He's the gifts officer there who does what do they call it? Planned giving. He just retired, but if you're a regular donor to Duke, you know that Wes Brown is going to come to you and say, and the question he will ask you is, what do you want your legacy to be? And when he asks regular donors, he's not at first asking them to put Duke in their will. He's saying, you're already a donor, what do you want your legacy to be? And then he can align what they're passionate about to what the seminary is doing. And pretty soon, you have this kind of regular, every year they're getting planned gifts from people who were passionate over decades who pass away. And it just strikes me as something that probably every nonprofit should be doing better, but especially schools.
I don't want to, I thought the idea of UNCF, United Negro College Fund, for 6 black theological seminaries was a powerful idea. Did anybody else think that, or we didn't hear, not that we were asking for a response to the idea, but it just felt like a tremendously powerful idea of what you discussed it last summer. Okay. Any headway? Or what are we thinking? Any head? Thinking of branding, huh? Yeah. You need a philanthropic strategist. That would just be fabulous, y'all. It would be, and I hope you don't. I don't want anybody to admit. I appreciate foundations. The Lilly Endowment has been tremendous to Christian Theological Seminary. I probably wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for their gift. But I also want us to be partners, equal. I don't want to be in the. It's like black preaching. I want us to be on a par with Euro-American preaching or Korean preaching, so we can all dialogue and from a place of equality, rather than we got to head out. We can't do it unless somebody gives us this, or nothing wrong with grant writers, but we got to find a grant. It's I get this. I was a pastor, and I went to do a revival at 3-night revival at a Catholic church on the south side of Chicago. And that Catholic church bought an ad book. They called me more to put an ad in the ad book than they invited me to come do 3 nights. Right. So I was worked up because they wanted me to buy an ad in the ad book. And so when I walked into the church, they had a sign down there, and it said $75,000 for restroom renovation, $5,000 to this. That's what the ad book was connected to. So I went back to the back and I said, Father, can I just be honest? I said, why do we ask people who don't believe in the work of our God to do the work of our God? Why do you mind if I say that to the people? He said, Frank, you'd help me if you'd say that to the people. So I got him and said, y'all with the ad, nothing's wrong with the ad book, but I'm saying, as hard as y'all work on the ad book, why do we have to keep asking people that don't know our God to fund the work of our God? Something is wrong with this. Especially when we say God got everything. So I didn't think they were going to invite me back. Somehow I made it back. And they had gotten all that stuff done right out of. And I just believe that. This text that I know the historical, I know the wealth inequity, I know Black people were I read The Color of Law. Black people have been discriminated against from getting wealth. I understand all that. We also have a God. I found when I read The Color of Law, I felt disadvantaged because I grew up on the South Side in a community that had been redlined and blacks had been kept out. And when blacks moved in, everybody moved out, white flight. I read the book, I got mad until I realized that in the black church, I met a God that out of all of that suffering and pain and agony and discrimination, it has produced a tradition that can revive American Christianity. So I feel like I'm at an advantage. Don't have money, but I got something. You cannot measure heart and desire with charts. So can I read that scripture? If you have any more questions, or just as the closing word. Frank, can I borrow? I know you put your iPad up. I left my iPad at home, and Frank Yamada saved me because I had paper, but the iPad is so much smoother. I look more suave and smooth. I've been turning pages, and I say to my pre, why you got them pages up there? Thank you, sir. This is. It says, "Sing, O barren one who did not bear. Burst into song and shout, you who have not been in labor. For the children of the desolate woman will be more than the children of her that is married, says the Lord. Enlarge the site of your tent. Let the curtains of your habitations be stretched out. Don't hold back. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes in the ground, for you will spread out to the right and to the left." If you read that, it says, "For the Holy One of Israel is thy Redeemer." So now, if my organist was here, I'd close now, but my organist is late. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, again, and thank you for engaging in that Q&A and the reflections on the presentation. I'm just going to offer a few closing remarks. First, I'd like to say thank you for everyone for engaging in these 2 days. I hope you found them to be a valuable investment of time and an opportunity to be a part of this community of learning. We've listened to powerful presentations on the gift of Black theological education and the gift of Black preaching. You've seen data and research, heard from school teams and our student panel, and had the opportunity to be in conversation with colleagues. We're grateful for all of the sharing and the rich conversations that we've been a part of over these 2 days. We invite your participation in a post-symposium evaluation. It will be in your email box upon your departure today. And we really want to get that feedback from you. We're really interested in what you valued in these 2 days, how you might use what you heard in your own communities, and what are the expectations for what's next. All of the sessions that have been